Welcome once again to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mayo. We got Sports 25 to life. Talking about DraftKings specific here. Going to be a really interesting night on DraftKings, especially for tournaments. Got to have two pitchers. Probably don't want to have two pitchers tonight, but could give you an edge in your GPPs if you're one of the few that nails two pitchers that have good games, because Vegas doesn't seem to think there's going to be very many pitchers who have good games tonight, and hard to argue with it because there's not a lot of great options. So we'll start here at the top. C.J. Wilson, $8,400. I know he's the guy that you're a big fan of. So why don't you give me your C.J. Wilson breakdown here?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that I'm going to be using probably a decent amount in GPPs more than anything. Probably a little bit in cash games as well. The Yankees just have a lot of left-handed bats that they're going to have to replace with righties today. The Angels playing a decent pitcher's park. The Yankees have had pretty decent numbers against lefties, so I'm not like super enamored with them, but I mean, without having some of these lefties like Garrett Jones and stuff in the lineup providing some extra power, especially Yankee Stadium, I feel a little bit better about Wilson and maybe the Yankees cooling off a little bit. The big thing is I think he's going to be pretty low owned at 8,400 with some decent other options that seem like they're being hyped up much cheaper than that. I think he's going to be really low owned and has a chance to really set you apart if he has a nice game. The biggest thing for me is that he's been pitching really well. He struggled quite a bit last time out against Houston. They roughed him up a little bit. But prior to that, he'd gone 5 straight games where he pitched at least 6 innings, had at least 7 strikeouts. So his stuff was looking pretty good. His strikeout rate's been over 25% over the last 6 games. So he's just a guy that I think is going to be really low owned, has a chance to score probably the most points on the night of any pitcher. But there's definitely some downside there. We know the Yankees have a lot of power from both sides, especially with A-Rod and Teixeira in the middle of that lineup. So not a guy that I'm probably going to be like going 100% on like I usually have as one of my starting cash game pitchers. I just don't think there is one of those guys today. So it's going to be a lot of mix and matching for me more than I usually do in cash games, especially with pitchers.
Yeah, I'm with you there. No obvious play, but I think he's a fine option if you're paying up. I'll probably be trying to save some money at pitcher, go with some of these cheaper, okay options, and get some big bats. But a couple options here. Kendall Graveman's a guy, biggest favorite on the night, minus 160 right now, 6,200. We know this is a Colorado team that's really struggled on the road. They've been worse against lefties than righties, but Graveman's been efficient. 4 straight games, he's pitched at least 7 innings. He's only got 1 win through those, but even went 8-inning complete game at the Angels there. 17 or more DraftKings points in 4 in a row and 5 of his last 7. So, I mean, this is a guy he's been okay. He's not a guy that's going to put up huge numbers, but at 6,200, I think he's a fine secondary option, as your cash game because he's cheap. Other guys that we were talking about earlier, Mike Leake, I know you're a fan of. Hopefully the weather holds up here, but he's actually pitched really well after really struggling there for a while. Got a 29-point outing, 15, a 30, a 21, all in his last 5. $6,900 against the Minnesota team. It's not very good against right-handed pitching. And now they are losing the DH for the night, obviously being in Cincinnati. So I think those two guys are like your epitome of average pitchers. You can put those two guys in. You don't expect they're going to kill you. You also don't expect either one's going to score you 30 points, but kind of opens up some flexibility with your lineup.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, that's the big thing is I'm probably going to use quite a bit of these guys in the 6 to 7,000 range. You mentioned Leake. I mean, Bolsinger is going to be probably a cash game type guy for me at a minus 150. Probably on the good side of that 9-run over-under. Jimmy Nelson is probably my favorite pitcher of the night going against Philadelphia. Only minus 143, but Philly's offense has just been really bad. Nelson's been basically a boomer bust guy for the entire season. But the good thing is he's been taking advantage of the good matchups is the big thing. I mean, he had nice games against the Mets in Pittsburgh, struggled against some of the better offenses that he's faced. The problem is that when he struggles, he just really, really struggles. We saw him go against Kansas City, give up 11 hits, walk a couple guys, managed to hold them to only 3 runs, but didn't strike out anyone, which will happen to you against Kansas City now and then because they have a ton of contact guys. But I mean, when he gets hit, he gets hit. I mean, most of the time when he's having rough games, he's giving up double-digit hits. So you just got to try and get a good game from him. But at 6,600, it's more than worth the price there, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's worth the risk because he does have that substantial upside. He does have the best matchup on the board against terrible offense against right-handed pitching. So certainly a guy you're looking at. Another guy, I don't really like his price, but he's an interesting option. Lance McCullers, 7,700. I mean, goes against Kansas City. You were just mentioning Jimmy Nelson. Didn't have a single strikeout against him. McCullers more of a strikeout pitcher than Nelson is, but I don't know. This one's tough for me because it looks like Hosmer's going to be out. Kane's not 100%, so he's an interesting guy, but I really don't have high expectations for him in GPPs, despite the fact that he does have 7 or more strikeouts in 4 of his last 5 games, because this team just doesn't strike out, like you said, with the Jimmy Nelson thing. I mean, he misses more bats than Nelson does, but I think the upside is kind of capped there. And, it's in Houston, so it's not an ideal ballpark. But I think he's going to be a pretty popular option tonight because of his high upside. I just feel like it's kind of capped with this matchup. So I would prefer a guy like Nate Carnes, $600 cheaper. Lowest total on the board, 7 runs. And he's pitched well recently and had a nice start against this same team 2 starts ago. 17 or more fantasy points each of his last 3. Kind of falls into that Leak and Graven category where not going to give you a great game, but you can kind of bank on him giving you a pretty good start, though.
Yeah, definitely. He's another guy in that same price range. I mean, that's where we got to look really today if we're going to be basically playing anything, because if you're going to be spending up on C.J. Wilson, you're giving up a lot if you aren't getting 5-10 more points out of him than you are one of these 6,500 or so guys. So that's the thing. That's a big thing that's keeping me away from C.J. Wilson. If he was priced closer to those guys, I'd be playing a lot more of him. But the fact that you can get a really similar range of outcomes from guys priced 2,000 lower than Wilson will probably keep me away a little bit. But I still think he's the highest upside option on the board, just in terms of strikeouts, pitching deep into the game, stuff like that. He just feels the safest. I think Bolsinger's probably the second guy on that list for me, although the heat there is really worrying me a little bit in terms of going deep into the game. So there's just huge question marks with everyone. So you're basically just trying to find the guys that you feel most comfortable with the question marks that they do have. And like you mentioned with McCullers, if that question mark is maybe he's not going to strike out as many guys as he usually does, you can probably get past that pretty easily, where if you're looking at someone like who's a good example of this? Like R.A. Dickey, where you're basically just hoping that he has a good game.
Yeah.
That's a little bit riskier, and so you're probably going to want to save that for only a couple GPP lineups, something like that. So it's a tough day for pitchers, but there's definitely a plethora of options out there that's going to make GPPs and cash games interesting, because there's not going to be many heavily owned pitchers, in my opinion.
Yeah, and like you said, Vegas has a lot of high totals today. They're expecting a lot of runs, so you're going to need big bats. So get creative, but certainly on DraftKings, you're going to need at least one of the cheaper options so you can get some bats in your lineup. Moving on to catcher, Stephen Vogt's my favorite option. David Hale's awful against lefties. Stephen Vogt's great against righties. I mean, that one, not a whole lot of analysis necessary there. 4,300. He's a guy that I'll be playing quite a bit tonight. Another interesting option, $3,600 Jonathan Lucroy. Sean O'Sullivan, much worse against lefties, but still not a very good pitcher against righties either. And I like that option because Vogt's going to be popular, so you're going to need to swerve off in GPPs a little bit. I think Lucroy is one of my favorite ways to do that tonight.
Yep. Despite the price, I like Yasmani Grandal, even if he's hitting a little bit low in the lineup today. You mentioned on our pitcher podcast that heat there really is going to make the ball fly. He's hitting from the left side of the plate, and I believe the wind's blown out to right pretty heavily, 15, 20 miles an hour today. So I'm going to like all the lefties in the Dodgers lineup today for the most part. He's probably more of a GPP play at 4,100 just because, I mean, it's a little pricey when you can get Vogt, who's a lot safer for 4,300 in a good lefty-righty matchup there. As far as cheap guys go, I'm not really that excited about anyone in value plays wise at catcher today. I'd much rather spend up on one of these 3 or 4 guys at the top with Lucroy, Grandal, Vogt, Martin. Outside of that, I'm not seeing anyone I'm really too excited about.
No, really not at all. I think it's an option tonight where cash games you're probably playing Vogt because that's who everyone else is going to play, and he's just in a great spot.
Yeah.
First base options, there are a lot, of course, as there always are, and my favorite on the night is going to be Prince Fielder against Bud Norris. Fielder's been just the model of consistency all season. You and I especially have been talking about it. He's just that guy that people just don't play enough, and he's been having a hell of a season. Bud Norris, 410 WOBA allowed to left-handed batters. Certainly a guy you want to pick on with lefties. A lot of good lefties in this Texas lineup. So that's the team I'll have the most exposure to. But I mean, Prince Fielder batting 351 on the year. I mean, he's having a great season. He's an awesome cash game play tonight, and I'll have him in some GPPs as well.
Yeah, I think Fielder and Adrian Gonzalez, are my two favorite plays on the day. I'm not going to be going away from them too much in cash games. GPPs, we mentioned the Heat in Arizona. I like Goldschmidt a decent amount, even though Bolsinger's a righty. It's really hard not to like Goldschmidt basically every day he plays when he's in a halfway decent condition. Obviously, he's 5,800, but with all the cheap pitchers we talked about, you can get really anybody you want in your lineup. So you could go 6,500 or so pitchers and pretty easily get Goldschmidt in there. So I'm not too concerned about that. I love that as a GPP play. Albert Pujols is another guy I like basically in both formats. 4,400 against a lefty in Sabathia. I'm pretty excited to play him tonight, honestly. I mean, his batting average has been rising like crazy. He's just been mashing home runs. I mean, there's just not a lot not to like there. David Ortiz is another guy. He has a pretty good history against Dickey. He's faced him a ton. So if you're going to play anybody in that Red Sox lineup today, I think Ortiz is probably my favorite one. He's only 4,200 on DraftKings, so that's a nice price for him also.
Yeah, and I'll throw in one more guy. I wish he had outfield eligibility here, but that's going to keep his ownership even lower. Mitch Moreland, another lefty, $3,600 against Bud Norris. You and I mentioned it. We like to pay for bats at first base, but certainly in GBP you want to be different. And I think that he's probably your highest upside cheap guy for tournaments, and I tend to think he's going to go pretty low with all these big bats at the top.
Yeah, people are going to go Fielder like you were talking about if they're going to play a first baseman in that game. So I think Moreland's an absolutely fantastic GPP play today.
Absolutely. I'm moving on to second base. Jason Kipnis is up there, gets Nate Carnes, $4,700. I think it's a nice tournament option. For me, I think my favorite option in cash, if I'm paying up, is going to be Ben Zobrist. Once again, picking on David Hale. Yep. Zobrist's been batting cleanup. He's just been the model of consistency. He's been hitting for some power. He's been walking, getting on base, getting timely hits. I mean, a lot of things going in Ben Zobrist's favor tonight. Second base and outfield eligibility. I absolutely love him. And then going back to the cheap guy once again, absolutely love Rougned Odor, another lefty against Bud Norris. But the guy's just been mashing the ball, and he's only $3,300, and I think he's a great option as well.
Yeah, the only other guy I'm going to add to the top of the list, Jason Kipnis against a righty in Carnes, I think is a fine play. He's a little expensive, but we should have plenty of money to spend today. If you're looking for cheap guys, I think Odor is the obvious play at 3,300. Yep. You can look at a couple other cheap guys, but I don't really think they compare to him very much. I mean, there's quite a few guys between like 2,100 and 2,800 that are playable, but I'd rather just spend that extra couple $100 and get Odor, especially if he's sitting second. If he's sitting second, I can't even justify any of these other guys, really. Yeah. I mean, the rest of these guys are hitting pretty low in the lineup, 8th for the most part. Maybe Giovitella, if he's hitting first for the Angels at 2,800, I think you can argue for him a little bit against a lefty in Sabathia, but that's probably the only one if Odor is sitting second that I would even consider.
Yeah, I'm with you there. If Odor is hitting second, he's going to be a lock for my cash games. I'll play him a ton of tournaments as well. Just a great spot for him. Elite matchup. Third base, Todd Frazier is a nice contrarian play, I think, because people are going to be all over Nolan Arenado because they have money to spend tonight. 3 multi-homer games, I believe, in his last 5. Obviously, I mean, he's just crushing the ball right now. But he's in Oakland. Todd Frazier's in Cincinnati. Great ballpark for right-handed power. Mike Pelfrey, when he's bad, he's really bad. So you got to like him. Manny Machado, though, probably my favorite play as far as cash games go if I'm paying up. $5,100 gets lefty Wandy Rodriguez. And Machado's, I mean, he's just been absolutely incredible this year. He's hitting for power. He's stealing bases. He's getting on base, hitting at the top of that order. And Wandy Rodriguez, he's been an okay pitcher this year, but that's about it. And Machado's been one of the better hitters in the game over the past month or so.
Yeah, definitely. He's probably my favorite third base GPP option today. He's 5,100, so it makes him kind of hard to play, but I don't think there's a better option in GPPs. Yep. It's just, I mean, the price will keep his ownership down. The wind's blowing out today. He's facing a lefty. I mean, you have to like everything there. As far as cash games go, I think I'm going to play Alex Rodriguez a ton against Wilson in lineups that I don't have Wilson. He's just absolutely crushed lefties this year, and he's going to be hitting right in the middle of that lineup. I feel pretty good about him at 4,300. I'm going to continue to ignore Jake Lamb until he starts doing things that make me more. Yeah, and I just don't know what to do with him. He keeps hitting in good spots in the order. He's just, I mean, he's not knocking in runs. Like, I mean, it's tough hitting behind Goldschmidt since he's clearing the bases all the time, but just not a guy that I really want to pay for at all. Um, I'd prefer Brock Holt against Dickey probably to him for 100 less in the Rogers Center. That it's just a better hitter's park. That's probably one of the cheaper guys I would look at.
Yeah, a couple more guys I'll throw out there. Justin Turner, been hitting for a ton of power. We mentioned the hot air humidity in Arizona. Ball should be carrying $4,400 for him. He's got a homer, I believe, in 5 of his last 8 games. So he's really heating up. Guy that's still kind of flying under the radar, so I like him quite a bit. And then a guy who's been struggling, but it's another one of those elite matchups with a lefty against Bud Norris. Joey Gallo is only $3,300. Obviously, Bud Norris is just arguably the worst pitcher on the board tonight, if you ask me, especially against lefties. So I'm going to have quite a bit of him in some tournaments as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's a pretty solid play there. That's probably going to do it for what I'm looking at third base today.
Same for me. And shortstop, you got the money. I want to pay for Carlos Correa against Joe Blanton. Correa, now that Giancarlo Stanton's on the shelf for 4 to 6 weeks, he's now hitting the ball harder than anyone in baseball. $5,300 is pricey, which might keep his ownership down a little bit. But, I mean, the guy's just absolutely destroying the ball. Joe Blanton's not a guy that throws the ball hard either. So when he gets a hold of one, it's going to go a long way. Got to like the ballpark in Houston for him. If not him, Jose Reyes, $4,500 against Buckles is okay because he's in the Rogers Center. You can get Tulowitzki, but he's in Oakland, $4,700. Really the only cheap guy, I'm probably going to get Carlos Correa in most of my lineups, to be honest with you, with the money I have tonight. But Xander Bogaerts at $3,600 is the other guy I'm looking at for cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a great play today at shortstop. There's not a lot of guys that I like very much at shortstop today. It's probably my least favorite position out of all of them. There's no one really cheap that stands out to me. I mean, you can look at a couple of these guys, but they all hit really low in the order. The one guy that I would look at pretty heavily if you're not playing Jimmy Nelson is Cesar Hernandez for Philly. Hits second the last couple of times they faced a righty. He's only $2,800. That's probably a decent way to go if you're looking for someone cheap. I'd be interested to see what the Yankees do at second base today with Steven Drew facing a lefty. I really can't see them playing him today, so they might do something else with someone really cheap. Keep an eye on that lineup when it comes out. But other than that, I'm probably sticking to the guys you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we move to the outfield, Mike Trout's going to be a popular play against CC Sabathia, as he should be. He's under $5,000, $4,900. He will be in all my cash game lineups tonight. I find it really hard not to play him at that price tag. And other options at the top, Jose Bautista at home. I like him in tournaments. Interestingly enough, Jay Bruce is the number 2 hitter here price-wise. DraftKings has been pretty tough with this pricing. They seem to know where they're going with these. So with Jay Bruce at home, lefty power against a righty. Pelfrey not an overpowering pitcher by any means. Maybe Jay Bruce strikes out a couple times. I mean, he always seems to strike out. But he's got a lot of power, though, and that's what you're paying for there. So I think with that price tag, he's going to be really low owned.
Yeah, I think so, too. That's probably one of my favorite outfield plays. There's quite a few outfielders I like today, though, so this is probably the deepest position, one of the ones I'm going to be spending up at quite a bit. You mentioned Trout. I think he's going to be in a ton of my lineups. Jock Peterson and Puig are probably going to be in a bunch of my lineups also with that heat there and the wind blowing out to right field. A couple other guys I like more in the middle here. Josh Reddick is another guy I like. There was one other guy. Shin-Soo Choo, if he's back in the lineup again today. $3,500 against Norris, especially if you're looking at playing Prince Fielder or Moreland or someone like that. He's going to be hitting right around those guys, so I think he's a pretty good play. Steve Pearce is another guy in that game that I think is really interesting, especially on DraftKings where he has second base eligibility, I believe, right now. I think he's a pretty interesting second base and outfield play at $3,800 against a lefty. He's hit lefties pretty well all season. Pretty hard to argue with him at that price.
Yeah, I got an interesting tournament play here. You don't know how healthy he is. They've elected not to put him on the DL. He played one of the 2 games yesterday, but Adam Jones does get a lefty at home, so maybe he's not healthy enough to run the bases well, but I mean, he's still going up there and swinging the bat. I can't imagine that if he's not healthy enough to hit, he won't be in the lineup. So I think he's going to be a really sneaky play. He's only been back for 1 game, sat out the second game there, but he does mash lefties, so I think he's a nice tournament option there as well. Billy Burns is a guy that, could put up big-time numbers on the base paths today because, as we know, none of these Colorado catchers are very good at throwing runners out, especially Michael McHenry. So Billy Burns, due to his price tag, you usually want to pay for power hitters around that price, but 4,700, if he swipes a couple bags, he's been getting on base every game, been scoring some runs. So I think he's a really interesting tournament option there at 47 as well. One cheaper guy I want to mention here, Alejandro De Aza is an interesting guy. He's been hitting the ball really well. You don't like his lineup spot, batting between 6 and 8, usually 8 most days, but this is a guy who's homered in 3 of his last 4 games, $3,900, and the bottom of that Boston order has actually been producing at a pretty high level recently. So I think he's going to be a really low-owned guy that's got some upside.
Yeah, that's a good one too. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else really cheap that I like today, but I really think I'm spending up at outfield with how cheap the pitchers are. I mean, there's a lot of guys with like great points per dollar numbers, especially on the Dodgers at Arizona and a couple of these other guys like Trout and stuff like that I don't think I really want to go cheap. I mean, maybe Eddie Rosario if he's sitting second for Minnesota. That might be an option for me, but he's 3,200. I think I'd rather just pay up a little more and go cheaper at one of these positions that we mentioned we don't like as much, like second base, shortstop, stuff like that. So it's going to be a really big lineup construction day. There's a lot of ways you can go, but I'm preferring spending up at the outfield today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you one cheap guy. I think it's an okay option because he is facing a lefty. Chris Young is a guy you can consider. Obviously, he should be in the lineup against the lefty right now. I believe he's homered in. I know he homered on Saturday off Oberholtz, or I believe he's homered in 2 straight games with facing the lefty.
Yep.
So $3,500 for him. Great tournament option there, especially if he's batting second tonight.
Yeah, I like that one too.
All right, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our optimizer, cheat sheets, lots of great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.